They called me a guest in my own kitchen while I stood there holding the pot of chicken soup I'd made for my grandson, and I don't think I'll ever forget the sting of wooden spoon against enamel or the sound of Kayla's voice hitting that polished granite like a mallet. She set her phone down with a tap, looked at my son as if he were a manager and I was the staff who needed disciplining, and said, "Your mother needs to stop touching things that aren't hers." Eric didn't meet my eyes. He shrugged and took the pot from my hands, as if taking a toy from a toddler, saying he'd order takeout to avoid confusion. I told myself not to cry, because I don't do that in front of people who enjoy winning small, mean victories, but I felt my fingers trembling anyway and a heat in my cheeks that had nothing to do with the stove. It would be easier if I could tell you I've always been fierce, but I haven't. I am precise. I am patient. I am a retired bookkeeper who still balances her checkbook using a pencil and a metal ruler. Not because I don't trust online banking, but because the rhythm of numbers softly lining up is the only thing that ever quieted my mind when life rattled the windows. My name is Nora, I'm 70, and most days I can carry my groceries, lift my memory foam mattress, and remember where the screwdriver is. I'm a widow of 9 years, mother of one complicated son, grandmother of a boy who loves the smell of cinnamon and the way golf balls sink into soft grass. I am also someone who, since my hip surgery in January, has been measured and weighed by the people who say they love me as if I were a suitcase at the airport, with a tag that says, "over the limit." And most days I say nothing because the thing I fear most is being a burden. The soup incident wasn't the first small humiliation, it just happened to be the one that made me finally look at my own kitchen and notice how it had been rearranged right under my nose. The mugs I liked were pushed into the back. My spice jars were refilled with cheaper brands that clumped. Labels I wrote in my careful, slanted hand had been peeled off and replaced with the type Kayla orders in sheets, perfect, glossy, and wrong about where anything should live. There were new rules about everything. How far the toaster should be from the outlet, which shelf was safe for me to reach, which days I should cook to avoid mess. As if I were a guest in a hotel that happened to contain my own bedroom and a closet full of my late husband's flannel shirts that nobody would let me donate because, Grandma, that's Dad's smell, don't be dramatic. If I sound bitter, I want you to know I didn't start that way. When Eric and Kayla moved in with me temporarily to save for a house, his word, temporary, as if months had no way of stacking into years, I was the one who put the good towels in their bathroom. The one who gave Kayla the bigger closet because she said hanging up silk dresses in a small space gives her a headache. The one who cleared the sunniest shelf for her houseplants. I told myself that after losing my husband, a full house would be noisy in the right kind of way, and I meant it. It's just that the noise began to talk over me. The bathroom lock broke and never got fixed because we'll get to it. The basement, where I kept the file boxes with tax returns, warranty cards, the deed to the house, life's boring important stuff, gained a key on the inside of the door that I didn't own. My grandson wrote me notes on sticky paper that said, "Love you, Nana," and I kept those folded in the pocket of my robe so I could pull them out when Kayla's smile flicked on and off like a motion sensor light, warm when I praised her, cold when I didn't. The first seed of this story didn't sprout from anger, it came from confusion in mine. I went to the bank on a Tuesday, the same branch where I've gone for 25 years, the one that still keeps a bowl of dog biscuits at the counter because the manager, Mr. Lopez, is sentimental about Labradors. I wanted to withdraw a little extra cash to tuck in an envelope for my grandson's golf camp fee. The teller, a young man who'd only been there a few months and wore a tie with tiny lightning bolts, glanced at his screen and said, "Oh, Mrs. Aguilar, I see you already withdrew last week," and he named a larger number than I ever take out at once. I stared at him for a second, thinking perhaps he had my account mixed with someone else, but when he turned the screen slightly, I saw my name, my account, and a withdrawal log that showed something that made my stomach go cold. Repeated ATM withdrawals late at night, amounts just under a round number, the kind people think won't be noticed. "Could I have a printout?" I asked, keeping my voice even the way I did during audits at the construction firm when a foreman tried to hide a beer tab in the petty cash. The teller hesitated, glanced at the manager's office, and finally printed the sheet. I put it in the inside pocket of my coat. It crackled against the lining like a whisper. That night, I lay awake and listened to steps in the hallway, the refrigerator door closing, a phone lighting up. I made myself breathe slowly so I wouldn't do something foolish like get up and accuse my daughter-in-law of stealing from me without proof. I started paying attention. That's all. If you want to know how women my age survive, that's the trick nobody teaches. You become a quiet camera with a heart. I noticed that Kayla liked to help by offering to run my errands and insisting I give her my card because it earns points. I noticed that when packages arrived, she opened them even if they had my name on them, and the box would sit in the mudroom exactly long enough for me to think it was mine, and then she would remind me, oh, that one's for Tyler's STEM kit, Nana. You know how Amazon mixes labels. I noticed that Eric, sweet, distracted Eric, who used to call me on his lunch break when he was a junior accountant at the plant, now had the distracted face of a man who imagines money solves time, who thinks the next promotion is a life raft when in fact the boat is sound and his wife is drilling holes. He began to mention house listings with backyards and the phrase seller's market as if it were a football team. He said things like, "We just need a bigger down payment, Mom, and you're sitting on equity. This neighborhood is up 20%, and I would soften, because he is my son, and because the math sounded harmless when it came out of his mouth." The second seed was the paper Kayla left on the kitchen island on a Friday afternoon, under a candle that smelled like sea salt and a stack of glossy magazines that told women how to be young for 30 pages, and then made them feel old. I only saw the edge of the paper because it had a blue notary stamp, and my eye is trained to see official ink. I slid it out just a millimeter, too careful to crinkle, and I saw the words, "Durable Power of Attorney," and then my name, and then a section bolded, "Effective immediately." My hands went cold again in that way that makes your fingers go slightly numb, like they're holding snow. I put the paper back exactly the way it had been, and I went upstairs to my room and I sat on the edge of my bed, and I told myself there had to be some reasonable explanation. Maybe Kayla had printed a generic form to ask questions. Maybe. But the notary stamp was not a maybe. I waited until Sunday morning because that's when Kayla sleeps in and Eric takes my grandson to the driving range. I went down to the basement and tried the door. It was locked from the outside, which was new. I'd never seen that before, and there was a slot above the handle where a new, shiny lock laughed at my old brass key. I stood there a long time, then went back up, brewed coffee, and put it in a travel mug. I told Kayla I was meeting my neighbor, Mrs. Russo, for the church rummage sale, which was the sort of organic small-town thing that Kayla doesn't fight because it makes her look soft when she tells her Instagram followers she's bringing Nana to community events. What I did instead was walk 3 blocks past the church to the UPS store, where the notary works on Sundays. I smiled at the young woman behind the counter who has a small silver ring in her nose and a ponytail so bright it could be a warning flag. "Carmen," I said softly, because I know her name, because I notice people who move quickly and speak fast and slip when they're nervous. I wanted to ask, if someone signs a power of attorney with you, do you keep a log? She hesitated, and then she did a small tilt of her head that told me she was deciding whether I was about to entangle her in something messy. "We have a notary journal," she said, which is how I knew she took her job seriously, because not all of them keep one. "Why?" "I think I may have signed something I didn't fully understand," I said, which was a lie but also close enough to some future truth I could feel breathing at my back. My daughter-in-law brought me a stack of forms after my surgery, and my memory of that day is foggy. Carmen looked at me for a long moment and then said, "If you can tell me the approximate date and the name on the form, I can check if there was an entry. I can't give you copies without a subpoena, but I can tell you if your name is in my book." I told her the date of my surgery and the week after, and she turned the journal around, angling it away from the security camera in the ceiling in a small, defiant motion that told me she had weighed some moral ledger and sided with me. After a minute, she said, "There's an entry for a Nora Aguilar, durable power of attorney, signed at this counter. The representative who brought you is Kayla Benson." She paused. "There's a note." Signer appeared drowsy. The first hard click of truth in my head was not shock, oddly enough. It was recognition, the way you recognize a smell before you can name it. After my hip surgery, I remember Kayla tugging on my sweater and laying papers in front of me with yellow sticky arrows. I remember a pen heavy in my hand and her voice saying, "Sign here too, Nana. It's just for the insurance," in a sing-song voice she uses when she wants the world to behave like a compliant machine. I didn't remember a notary. But if I had been as foggy as Carmen wrote, it would have been easy to steer me from the pharmacy next door to the counter, to place the pen at my fingers, to smooth my hand down on the wood and say, "For your protection." In fairness to Carmen, she couldn't have known. She logged the act. She stamped. The ink dried. I walked home slowly, careful not to let my thoughts run ahead of my feet. At the corner, Mrs. Russo waved me over to admire a crocheted blanket someone had donated to the rummage sale. And I stayed and studied the stitching and made approving noises and bought it for $5 because that is how you stay invisible when you're doing something dangerous. You buy a blanket and you fold it and you keep your voice steady. When I got home, Eric was back from the range and Kayla had changed into leggings and was perched on a stool with a smoothie, scrolling on her phone. She looked up with practiced brightness and said, "How was your little church thing, Nana?" And I said it was lovely, and would she like the blanket for her yoga room? I slept with that blanket on my bed that night and told myself stories about what people do when they are scared of slipping into the role other people have designed for them. The role of the old woman who gives up her checkbook, the one who sits on the end of the couch while life is organized around her. My jaw ached from clenching it. In the morning, I did something that might embarrass you to hear, but I promised you honesty. I tried to pretend to be more helpless than I am. I left a cupboard door open and forgot to turn off the kettle. I asked Kayla to help me fill my weekly pill box even though I do it with my eyes closed. She was delighted to step in, to brush my hand aside gently and say, "Of course, Nana, you don't need to fuss with this." I watched how easily she took control. I learned which things she enjoys handling. I made myself small, and I watched her grow. You might think, why on earth would I do that? Why would a woman who has been independent make herself smaller on purpose? Here is the unsentimental reason. In our state, when there is a suspicion of financial abuse of an elderly adult, there are protections, but they're hard to trigger if you look too capable. People think capacity is a switch on or off, and they don't like to see dial settings. I needed someone impartial to look in. I needed to know where Kayla thought the edges of my awareness were. I made myself a burden in a strategic way. It hurt my pride, but pride is a currency, and I had to spend it wisely. The second week after the soup incident, a letter arrived addressed to me but written with a flourish that was not mine. It was from my bank, notifying me of changes to my account alerts and limits, and it used phrases like, "Per your agent's instructions." It said that daily ATM limits had been increased and that electronic alerts now went to a different email address. The paper smelled faintly of the inside of the mailbox, winter, and dust. I folded it and put it under the blotter on my desk, the old-fashioned one with a leather top and gold edging my husband insisted made our little home office look official. I pulled the file box that held my will and the deed, but of course that box was no longer where it should be. When I asked Eric for the basement key because I wanted to get my Christmas decorations down, he said, "I'll bring them up later, Mom. The steps are too steep." And I smiled and said fine because there are some fights you never win with men who think they are being good sons, and I was hoarding my wins. That night, when Eric went to walk the dog, I asked Kayla in the kitchen, "What is a durable power of attorney for?" I kept my voice light, and I let my hands shake just enough to make her want to take the knife from me while I cut an apple. "It's for emergencies," she said quickly, the performance-ready answer of someone who rehearses her lines. "Like if you're in the hospital again, we can handle the insurance and bills. You don't need to worry." "Did I sign one?" I asked. "You did," she said, and smiled, and touched my elbow with 2 fingers. "It's okay, Nana. We're just trying to help." I nodded as if relieved, and the strange thing is that I felt a kind of relief. Not because she was helping, but because now it was named out loud. I took the apple skins to the trash, washed the knife, and looked out the window at the yard light next door that flickers every few seconds because the timer's miswired. I could see the shape of this thing, the way numbers had been shifting from my account to cash, the way my email had been quietly replaced, the way my basement had been locked, the way my signature might have been redeployed in the service of my protection. I began to collect my own small ledger of facts. I set my phone to record audio during family meetings, where Kayla liked to discuss household budgets. I changed one small thing in the bathroom, a prescription bottle snugged behind the towels, and checked if it moved when I was out. It did, which told me she was scanning my medications too. I befriended Carmen at the UPS store with kindness that was real, and she told me careful, but clear, that the day I signed, I came in wearing a hospital bracelet. She said Kayla had asked if we could hurry. She said she'd asked me if I understood the document, and I'd nodded and said my daughter-in-law is helping me, which is the kind of sentence old women say when they're tired and they want someone to leave them alone. I also went to see Mr. Lopez at the bank and said I needed to review my alert settings because I'd had trouble with my email. He pulled up the profile, and I watched his face change in tiny lines as he saw the new address, one that had Kayla's old online shop name tangled inside it like a fern. He cleared his throat and said, "We can certainly restore your original settings, Mrs. Aguilar, but if your agent changed them, she might have reason." And I said, "I'm here now," and he nodded and clicked and printed me another log. Do you know what else sits in the bank manager's office? A small sign, mostly ignored, that says, "We are mandatory reporters." It means that if they suspect exploitation, they must inform Adult Protective Services. I looked at that sign a long time, and I looked at Mr. Lopez the way you look at someone who remembers you before your house filled up with other people's rules. He met my eyes and said, very softly, "We like to keep our longtime customers safe," which isn't the same as saying he would report it. But it's the first time since my husband died that I felt something like someone standing behind me who wasn't asking me to sign anything. There is always a part of the story where you test your own courage in an ordinary place to see if you still fit inside it. Mine was the grocery store. I took a list and a coupon and bought only what I needed. At the checkout, the clerk, a teenage girl with chipped nail polish and a heartbreak she thought she hid, asked if I wanted cash back, and I said yes, and when the machine asked me how much, I pressed the smallest button. When I got home, I tucked the cash into the hardcover of an old cookbook with a torn dust jacket so it wouldn't be found if someone rifled my purse. I know how petty this sounds. But that is where I was, hiding $40 in the index of a baking book like a character in a cautionary tale because my own kitchen had become a place where I had to sneak. I don't want to make Eric the villain of this story because he isn't. He is my son, and he has always been the boy who brought home injured birds, the man who took 3 days off when I fell the first time and insisted on buying any gadget that promised to make my life easier. But Eric is also the kind of man who gets quieter when his wife is angry, and who believes that not choosing is a neutral act. He let things happen. When he told me one evening that they'd found a great advisor who could help me streamline my accounts and title the house smartly, I asked who, and he said Kayla has a connection, her friend's boyfriend. He's in real estate law. I smiled and said I would love to meet him. I said it in the tone I used to use when a contractor promised to send receipts, warm, polite, and recording every syllable. The last seed, if we're still calling them seeds, was a photograph, which is almost too neat for a story like this, but it happened. I was sorting old papers in my room, the kind of slow sorting where you find more memories than you find document order, and in a stack of letters from the year we paid off the mortgage, I found a faded Polaroid of me and my husband on the day we closed on the house. My hair was still mostly black. I wore a dress with a belt, and he wore a tie too wide for fashion but just right for his neck. We were laughing. On the back, in his scrawl, never neat, not like mine, he had written, "To our stubborn castle." It made me sit down, right there on the carpet, because I remembered how we promised each other no one would ever rush us out of this place unless it was because we wanted to go. I tucked the photo into my pocket and carried it with me for days, touching it when my brain began to tell me I was the one being difficult, that maybe Kayla was right and it was safer this way. 2 mornings later, the mail brought a plain envelope from a law office with a name I didn't recognize and a return address downtown. There was no cover letter, Just a copy of an unsigned transfer on death deed that would name Eric as the beneficiary of the house, and a sticky note with Kayla's handwriting, the bubbly letters she uses for notes to teachers and Instagram posts. Nana, can you sign this at your convenience? It's just to make sure the house passes easily, totally standard. My hands went very steady, which scared me more than shaking. It meant something in me had gone from wondering to deciding. That afternoon, I put on my church coat and the scarf my grandson says makes me look like a detective, and I walked, slowly, not to be dramatic, just so my breath would match my steps, to the office of the legal aid clinic at the community center. I chose them because they helped my friend Teresa when her landlord tried to keep her deposit, and because the private elder law attorneys have waiting rooms with coffee machines that make you feel like you must be wealthy to deserve a seat. The clinic waiting room has a water cooler and a stack of donated magazines, and a receptionist who wears sweaters with cats on them. I told her I needed to speak to someone about financial exploitation. The words sounded clinical and ugly in my mouth, but they were correct. The attorney who met with me was a woman in her 30s named Aisha, with kind eyes and a notebook full of tab stickers. She asked if I was safe at home. I said yes and also no. She asked if I had copies of anything. I slid the bank printouts across the table, the letter about the email change, the photocopy of the notary journal entry I'd begged Carmen to make for me without the actual signatures. She could get in trouble for that, so I'd refused. But the note was enough. I didn't give Aisha the photo from our mortgage day because that was mine. She read, she hummed a little, which I recognized as the sound professionals make when they see a pattern, and she explained something to me in plain, steady words. A durable power of attorney can be useful and also dangerous. It depends on the agent. She said it does not transfer ownership, but it lets the agent act. She said if it was signed when I lacked capacity, we had grounds to challenge it. She also said something I didn't know. If I had concerns, I could revoke it, but if they hid the revocation, we'd need to take other steps, like notifying the bank directly and filing a report. I don't want to blow up my family, I said. I want to be safe, and I want my son to see me, not a problem to be solved. She nodded. We can do both, she said. It may be messy, but we can do both. We'll start by securing your documents. Where are they? In a locked basement, I said. In my house. Do you trust anyone in your house with a key? She asked. I thought for a second and said no. But I trust the truth. Aisha smiled the smallest smile, the kind you make when a client says something you can work with. She made a plan, not a dramatic plan, not a movie plan, a simple one. Change the bank alerts back and add a secondary phone, mine, not a household one. Quietly move my Social Security direct deposit to a new account at a different bank the family doesn't use. Draft a revocation of power of attorney. Notify the notary's log that a complaint might be coming. And one more thing I hadn't thought of, place a small camera near the desk upstairs, pointed at the hallway to the basement, because that is public space, and in our state it is legal to record without telling the household. And sometimes the way people move when they think you're sleeping tells more than any speech. When I left the clinic, the air outside had that metallic smell it gets before snow. I stopped by the church and lit a candle, not because I thought lighting it would make Kayla kind, but because the steady flame felt like something I could stare at while remembering who I am when nobody is telling me what's safe for me. I went home, put dinner on, and when Eric said he'd be late, I said no problem, and when Kayla said she'd already eaten with a friend, I smiled and spooned my own food into a bowl and ate it at the table with the chair pulled out just so. The way my husband always did, with his knees barely touching the edge. I know, you're wondering when I'm going to confront them. That's what I asked myself every time I walked past the basement door. But a confrontation buys a scene. I needed something different. Proof that would hold when people started crying and using the words love and safety like tape to cover the ripped part of the story. So I did the thing that saved my career when the construction company's foreman tried to bill sand at the price of granite. I waited and I documented. I waited a week. In that week, the camera by the hallway caught 3 late-night trips downstairs by Kayla with a key she kept in a pouch sewn into her leggings. It caught her removing a manila folder and returning it before dawn. It caught her pausing outside my door, listening. I don't know why that last detail hurts me even now. Maybe because listening should be sacred, not something you do in a hallway like you're trying to catch a rat. On the 8th day, I woke up to a text from Eric asking if we could have a family budget chat that evening after dinner. I made a pot roast the way he likes it and set the table and placed the folded photograph of our mortgage day under my plate where nobody could see it, but where I could touch it with my thumb. They came to the table bright and artificial with that stiff cheerfulness couples wear when they're about to ask you to do something for the good of the team. After we ate, Kayla pulled out a folder with a thin smile and said, "Nana, since your birthday is coming up, we wanted to give you a gift that gives peace of mind." And she slid a stack of papers across the table with a blue pen and a strip of sticky flags. The top document was a gift deed transferring a percentage of my house into their names for estate efficiency. The second was the transfer on death deed, now with highlighted places for me to initial. The third was a family agreement drafted by someone who liked big words and no punctuation. I looked at my son. He looked at his lap. "Kayla found a great attorney who helps families do this all the time," he murmured. "Is this the friend's boyfriend?" I asked, keeping my voice in that middle range where men start hearing you as reasonable. Kayla's smile flickered. "He's very reputable," she said. "This is just paperwork. It doesn't change anything right now, it just makes sure you won't have to worry." I tapped the corner of the deed with my finger once, the way my husband used to tap his lunchbox to check it was closed. And in return, I said, "What do I get?" Kayla blinked. "Peace of mind," she said again, as if it were merchandise she had personally packaged. I looked at my son and said, "Eric, honey, can you bring up the Christmas decorations from the basement?" He looked confused. "Now?" he asked. "Yes," I said, smiling. "Now. I'd like a little holiday before we sign anything." He went. Kayla sat there frozen for a heartbeat and then followed with some excuse about finding a candle. I waited until their footsteps were on the stairs, and then I reached under my plate and took the photograph and slid it under the pile of documents so that when they came back, it would be the first thing they saw when they went to hand me the pen. And then I did one more thing I hadn't planned, but which came to me all at once like muscle memory. I reached into my sweater pocket and clicked the little audio recorder I'd tucked there on my way down from my room. The one my grandson gave me for Christmas last year, because he said, "Nana, you can use it to record your stories." Upstairs, two people who had reorganized my life to make it easier for them opened a door they thought they controlled. Downstairs, I sat at my own table and I waited. When Eric and Kayla came back with the plastic bin of red and green decorations and set it on the floor, Kayla reached for the papers, chirped, "Where were we?" and lifted the top page, and froze when she saw the Polaroid with our crooked grins and "Our stubborn castle" scrawled on the back. She held it by the corner like it might stain her fingers. Eric leaned in and his mouth opened slightly, the way a man's does when he sees himself at 13 and remembers something he thought he'd misplaced forever. "Before we sign anything," I said gently, "I want to tell you a story about this house." And that was when the doorbell rang, and when I opened it, Carmen from the UPS store stood there in her work cardigan, clutching a brown envelope, cheeks pink with nerves. She looked at me, then over my shoulder into the bright kitchen, and said, "Mrs. Aguilar, I'm so sorry to come to your home, but you asked me to let you know if anyone requested a copy of your notary record." She held out the envelope. Her hand shook. The very next morning after that dinner, the house felt different. It was as if every sound carried a hidden message. The clinking of cups in the kitchen, the footsteps on the hallway tiles, even the buzz of my phone on the nightstand. Victoria didn't come to check on me, didn't even ask if I had slept well. Instead, she left brochures for retirement apartments neatly stacked by the kettle where I usually brewed my tea. Their glossy covers showed smiling couples playing bridge and women in pastel cardigans laughing in gardens. On top of the pile was a note in her sharp handwriting. "Think about it seriously, Mom. It's time." I stood there staring at the pile while the kettle hissed, feeling as if I were already being relocated without my consent. At breakfast, Kevin was at the table with his laptop, scrolling through property listings. He didn't even bother to hide what he was doing. When I asked quietly if they were moving, he smiled politely, the kind of smile a banker gives a client he has already written off. We're exploring options. Downtown is closer to my office. This house is too much for you. You'll be more comfortable somewhere manageable. He spoke as if I wasn't the one who had chosen the wallpaper, who had planted the rose bushes, who had scrubbed every corner of that house for 4 decades. Victoria walked in moments later, holding her coffee like a trophy. Kevin and I will handle all the practicalities, Mom. You don't need to stress yourself. Just enjoy the time you have. Let us worry about the future. I wanted to tell her that worrying about the future had been my entire life, worrying about her education, her clothes, her happiness. But she wasn't listening. I swallowed my words and finished my toast. Later that afternoon, I overheard her on the phone. Yes, we'll have it by June. Mom doesn't understand the paperwork anyway. Don't worry, Kevin's already spoken with the notary. My heart skipped. Paperwork? What paperwork? She lowered her voice when she noticed me passing the hallway, but I had caught enough. The humiliations multiplied quickly after that. At Sunday lunch with some relatives, Victoria raised her glass and said, "To new beginnings. Kevin and I are finally taking charge of the family home." It's been hard watching Mom try to manage something so big. She smiled sweetly, but the words were daggers. A cousin asked jokingly if I was moving into one of those homes where people play bingo all day. Laughter erupted around the table. I tried to answer with dignity, but my voice trembled. Victoria patted my hand in front of everyone like one would calm a child. "It's for the best, Mom. You'll thank us later." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Robert. He had always been meticulous about documents, about ensuring security for me. He had shown me the will once, years ago, and I remembered clearly that he wanted me to have the house. Why then was Victoria speaking as if she were already the owner? At dawn, I went through Robert's old drawer in the study. Bills, old bank statements, his fountain pen collection. But the folder that used to contain his will wasn't there. My pulse quickened. Either I had misplaced it or someone had removed it. The following week brought a new wave of indignities. Victoria told the neighbors during a casual chat by the hedge that I was considering downsizing because the stairs were too much. She said it with a sympathetic tone, but her eyes glittered with triumph. I heard about it from Mrs. Green 2 doors down, who came over with a casserole. "She means well, dear," she whispered, "but maybe it's safer. You know falls at your age." I thanked her politely, though the casserole felt like pity more than kindness. Kevin, meanwhile, began intercepting mail. Once, when I picked up an envelope from the bank addressed to me, he casually took it from my hand. "Oh, that's probably related to the estate accounts. I'll keep it safe for you." Safe for me. I stood frozen, too stunned to protest. When I finally asked about it days later, he brushed me off. "Complicated numbers, Margaret. Let me and Victoria handle it. You don't want the stress." But the worst humiliation came when Victoria invited some of her friends from her charity club. She gave them a tour of the house, presenting it as if it already belonged to her. "We'll redo the living room, maybe open the kitchen into a modern island. Mom doesn't really cook anymore anyway." I was standing right there, holding a tray of teacups, like a servant in my own home. One of her friends, a sharp-faced woman with pearls, asked bluntly, "And where will your mother go?" Victoria laughed lightly, a rehearsed sound. "Oh, we'll find her something cozy. She doesn't need all this space. It's wasted." That night, I cried in the bathroom with the door locked, muffling the sound with a towel. My deepest fear was surfacing, to be seen as a burden, as an obstacle, as someone who had outlived her usefulness. Robert had always promised me dignity in old age. And yet here I was, treated like luggage to be stored away. The pressure grew unbearable. Victoria left a gift on my bed one morning, a glossy brochure of a senior living complex with first month free stamped in red. She wrote on a sticky note, "Think of it as a new adventure." I felt my knees weaken. That was no gift, it was a trap. She was preparing the ground to make me leave voluntarily, to sign something without realizing. A few days later, the bank called while Victoria was out. The young clerk on the phone asked politely about my decision regarding the joint account authorization. I froze. "What authorization?" I asked. He sounded confused. "The one your daughter submitted. giving her full access to your accounts. We just need your confirmation. My voice shook. I never signed anything. The clerk hesitated. Then you should come in, ma'am. It's important we clear this up. I hung up the phone with my hands trembling. The room spun. My daughter was not only planning to take the house, she was trying to gain control of my money as well. And worse, she had already presented something to the bank. A forged signature? A document I had unknowingly signed? I rushed to Robert's old desk again, hoping to find something, anything, that could anchor me. That's when I noticed the false bottom in the drawer, a tiny compartment I had forgotten about. Inside was an envelope addressed to me in Robert's handwriting. My breath caught as I opened it, half terrified, half desperate. Inside were 2 items, a letter and a photocopy of his will. The letter was brief. Margaret, if you're reading this, something has gone wrong. Trust no one until you confirm with Fitzgerald. Keep this copy safe. It's your shield. My eyes blurred with tears, but my hands clutched the paper tightly. The will confirmed what I had remembered. The house, the majority of the assets, everything was left to me. I sat there for hours, the envelope in my lap, heart pounding. My daughter thought she had cornered me, thought I was too weak, too naive, too broken to fight back. But Robert had anticipated something. And now I had proof. At dinner that evening, Victoria casually mentioned a meeting with the notary. We'll need your signature, Mom. Just a formality. Kevin and I will handle the details. I looked at her across the table, at her confident smile, at Kevin's calculating stare. My hands itched to pull out Robert's letter right then and there. But I held back. Instead, I smiled faintly. Of course, dear. Just let me know when. She didn't notice the shift in my voice. She didn't see the resolve that had taken root inside me. But I knew. The moment she mentioned that signature, I knew this battle was no longer about surviving humiliation. It was about justice. And the bank's call confirmed what I feared most. They were already trying to erase me from my own life. That night, as I hid Robert's letter in my pillowcase, a single thought kept me awake. If Victoria had already forged my consent once, what else was she capable of? The next morning, as sunlight crept across the curtains, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, Mrs. Green stood there again, but she wasn't holding a casserole this time. She held an envelope. This came to me by mistake, she said, lowering her voice. It's from the bank. Addressed to Victoria. But, Margaret, it mentions your account. I froze in the doorway, the envelope heavy in my hand. When Carmen handed me the envelope on my porch, I didn't bring her inside. I stepped out and closed the door behind me so the kitchen noise wouldn't swallow what she was about to say. Her eyes went to the window where she could see the edge of my table and the stack of papers Kayla had lined up like hurdles. Carmen swallowed and kept her voice low. A man came in this afternoon asking for a certified copy of your power of attorney record. He didn't give a name. He said he was a courier for an advisor. I told him our policy requires a written request from the principal. He got pushy, so I noted the time and refused. 10 minutes later, a woman called the store and asked if I could accommodate a family emergency. The caller ID matched Kayla's business line. I figured you needed to know. I thanked her without taking my eyes off the kitchen. I could hear Eric setting the decoration bin down, the rattle of ornaments like coins in a jar, and I could feel Kayla's attention on my back the way you feel heat near a stove. Carmen pressed the envelope into my palm. If you file a complaint, I'll stand by my journal, she said, and her cheeks flushed because she understood what that meant for her job. I told her I would make sure her manager knew she had done the right thing. I slipped the envelope into my coat pocket, told her to text me before she came by again, and walked back inside carrying my face like a quiet door. Kayla tried to reassert pace immediately. So, Nana, let's get signatures out of the way, and then we can do ornaments, she said with a bright tone that missed every signal in the room. Eric picked up the Polaroid and put it back down carefully. I reached for the stack of papers, slid them toward me, and kept my hand resting on top of them like I was smoothing out a wrinkle. Before signatures, I'd like to make one call, I said. I dialed speaker and said Aisha's first name the way you say someone's name when you need them to hear the urgency without panic. When she answered, I didn't announce anyone. I simply said, Kayla has brought me a gift deed and a transfer on death document. I'd like to confirm some things before I sign anything. Kayla's smile flickered, and Eric shot her a look like he had just realized there were rules he hadn't read. Aisha's voice was calm and steady. Mrs. Aguilar, you should not sign any document tonight. Please tell your family I need to review any instruments affecting title. If they have an advisor, I'll be happy to vet that person's license and any conflicts. She paused. And if anyone attempts to record a deed without your informed consent, we will involve the county recorder and the bank's elder client specialist. Kayla straightened like she'd been called to the front of a classroom. I don't know who this is, she said, controlling the pitch of her words, but you're scaring Nana. This is simple estate planning. Aisha didn't raise her voice. Then it will hold up to daylight. I'll email the recorder's office tonight flagging the parcel with owner contact notes. Good evening to you. I ended the call. For the first time in months, I watched Kayla measure me instead of directing me. She tried a gentler track. We only want to protect you, Nana. You hate paperwork. Let us take care of the stress. I nodded as if weighing a sweater at a store. Then you won't mind if we go together to the bank in the morning and the recorder's office after that, I said. We'll make sure my choices are on file by my hand. Eric opened his mouth, closed it, and finally said, Sure, Mom, we can do that. I stood and began clearing the plates. I let the recorder run until I heard the soft thud of Kayla's phone on the island, and then the whisk of her finger across the screen. I didn't look at her again that night. When I went to bed, I placed the recorder in the drawer between two folded sweaters. The camera in the hallway watched the dark like it understood something was about to shift. The decision came during a quiet hour when the house sounded like it used to, the dog snoring, the refrigerator clicking, the faint whistle of wind through the side gate. I lay there and put my fear on one side of an imaginary ledger and the proof on the other. The fear column had entries like eviction, family rupture, my grandson caught in a fight that wasn't his. The proof column had a journal note with signer appeared drowsy, bank logs with late-night cash, a text from someone calling himself advisor, and a neighbor who had just become a witness. Numbers don't lie, numbers align. I stopped considering comfort and began counting. In the morning, I was ready before the others. I made coffee, dressed in my good coat, and put 3 items in my bag: Robert's letter, the printout from Mr. Lopez's office restoring my alerts, and a small flash drive with the hallway camera clips from the past 8 nights. When Kayla came downstairs in her athletic jacket and Eric in his office casual, I smiled and held up my tote. I'm set, I said, and the ordinary discipline of those words made Eric relax while Kayla tensed. At the bank, Mr. Lopez met us in his office with the polite smile of a man who had already weighed what he could say with and without the words, policy says. I introduced Kayla and Eric, and then I placed my driver's license, Robert's letter, and the bank alert letter on the desk. I'm revoking any agent's control over my accounts as of today, I said. If prior documents exist, I request all revocation procedures. Mr. Lopez looked at Kayla's crossed arms and Eric's frown, and then back at me. He cleared his throat. Mrs. Aguilar, we can add a note to your client profile and require your verbal verification for any changes. Also, based on our conversation last week, I've connected you with our elder client specialist. She's here today. May I bring her in? He left and returned with a woman around my age with a laminated badge and a careful voice. She asked if I was safe at home. I said I was safe enough to speak in a bank office. She asked if I wanted to file a report. I said I wanted a record that I had raised concerns. She explained that if the bank observes unusual access patterns and a vulnerable client, they are required to notify Adult Protective Services. She did not look at Kayla when she used the phrase vulnerable client. Kayla shifted anyway. This is insulting, she said, trying to keep her voice friendly for the benefit of strangers. We're trying to help Nana, and you're acting like criminals. I started to apologize out of habit and then caught my mouth before the word left it. I turned to the elder specialist and said plainly, please notate my file that I'm of sound mind, that I request all alerts to go to my phone and my email only, and that no agent has permission to change contact details. I gave her the new email address Aisha had registered for me the night before with a password I had memorized twice over. Eric stared at the carpet, cheeks blotched with the stress of watching his wife lose control. Kayla pressed her lips together so hard I could see the line of her teeth. We left the bank and drove to the county administrative building. I had thought they might balk at this errand, but Eric even carried my tote and said he was proud of me for being proactive. The words sounded sincere and broke my heart a little. At the recorder's counter, a clerk named Lucia in a blue cardigan listened to my request. I want to put a protective notice in my parcel file that any deed or transfer instrument must be confirmed with me in person at the window, I said. I'm here now. I have ID. Lucia glanced at Kayla and then at me, and something like recognition flickered in her eyes, the kind people who work in offices get when they see patterns walk in wearing different jackets. We can add a courtesy note, she said, and we can alert supervisors if something is filed that looks irregular. We can't block a lawful recording, but we can slow things and we can call you before we process. She slid a form through the slot, and I filled it with my careful slanted hand. When I finished, she lowered her voice. A courier tried to file a TOD deed on your parcel yesterday afternoon and then withdrew when asked to provide verification of the grantor's presence. It wasn't fully presented, so there's no record, but we keep a log of attempted filings. She tapped a page behind the counter with her pen and didn't let me see it. She didn't have to. Kayla turned away and fussed with her hair. Eric said, "What's a TD deed again?" And Lucia explained it simply and clearly so nobody could pretend not to understand. Transfer on death. It does not change ownership now. It allows a beneficiary to take title outside probate when the owner dies. It requires the owner's signature and proper notarization. We look closely at them because they are sometimes misused. She didn't add by family, but it hung there anyway. On the way home, Eric suggested we stop for lunch, voice eager to reframe the day as a responsible outing. Kayla stared at her phone. I told them I would rather get home. I wanted the camera footage safe, and there were calls to make. In the driveway, Kayla touched my arm for the first time that day. "Nana, you're making this ugly," she said softly, and something in her eyes told me she was switching tactics. "I've done all the paperwork for months. You don't have to punish me for being organized." I took my arm back gently. "Help doesn't hide passwords," I said. "Help doesn't raise ATM limits at midnight." Her eyes flashed. "You don't know what you're talking about. You don't even check your email." I looked at her and didn't blink. "I do now." The next step in Aisha's plan required more pretending. I had to act tired enough that Kayla would step back into the role of household manager, but not so tired I lost my own thread. I let her handle dinner, and I went to my room early, supposedly to rest. Instead, I wrote a simple statement by hand. I, Nora Aguilar, revoke any power of attorney previously granted. I request direct notice from my bank regarding all changes, and I prohibit any person from using my funds without my express verbal approval. Aisha had given me the language and asked me to sign it twice, in ink, and to photograph it with that day's newspaper front page in the frame. I did, then emailed the photos to the new address and to Aisha, and I printed a copy and slid it into a book on my shelf that nobody reads because they think it's boring, a manual on household wiring my husband used to keep near the toolbox. That night, while the house slept, I moved my Social Security direct deposit to a new bank Aisha recommended. The online form felt like walking across a narrow bridge, but I did it, and when the confirmation pinged my phone, I felt something release in my chest that had been knotted for months. I also moved a modest cushion of savings to the same bank so I could pay for an attorney if I needed one. I did not move everything. That would have alerted Kayla too soon. I left enough to make her think she still had access, and then I waited. The first small victory came sooner than I expected. The next morning at 8, before anyone else was fully awake, my phone chimed with a text alert. ATM withdrawal declined. Daily limit changed by owner. A second later, a step creaked in the hall. I listened to the soft swear Kayla tries not to use when she thinks my grandson might hear. She came into the kitchen, set her smoothie cup down hard, and said she needed to run an errand. She didn't look at me. "Do you need cash?" I asked, as if I were still the woman who hadn't noticed. "No," she snapped, then tried to cover the edge. "I'll be fine." Aisha called mid-morning. She had spoken with the bank's elder specialist and with Lucia at the recorder's office. She had also drafted a letter to the notary commission concerning the day I supposedly signed. "We will not accuse the notary of wrongdoing," she said carefully. "We will request a review of procedures, and we will place your revocation on record with their supervisor, so any request for certified copies triggers a pause." "And one more thing," she added, and I heard papers shuffle. I pulled court dockets for the name of the advisor Kayla mentioned. "There's a man using that title around town who is not licensed as a fiduciary or as an attorney. He runs a marketing agency that sometimes funnels people to real estate deals. He has 2 small claims judgments and 1 complaint pending with the state licensing board under a different business name. Please do not meet him alone." I sat on the edge of the bed and pressed the phone to my ear because even when you know you're right, hearing confirmation lands differently. "Thank you," I said. "What else do you need from me?" Aisha paused, then used the tone professionals use when they need clients to do something unpleasant. "I need you to consider reporting to Adult Protective Services yourself, not just rely on the bank. A voluntary report carries weight. It shows you are alert and trying to protect your assets. They can't fix family, but they can help set boundaries." I took a breath. The idea of bringing in an agency felt like inviting my private shame to sit at the table. But Kayla had already invited her advisor to sit at mine. "Send me the form," I said. "I'll do it." As if the house were listening, the doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Green with a bag of lemons from her tree and a set of neighborhood association flyers about the spring meeting. "They want a volunteer treasurer since Mr. Buxton moved to Arizona," she said. "You'd be good at it, Nora. Numbers are your thing." I almost laughed at the timing, then realized it wasn't timing. It was the universe of small communities reminding me that my skills still mattered in public, not just behind closed doors. "I'll think about it," I said, taking the flyers. In the afternoon, I filled out the APS online intake with dates and facts, no adjectives. I listed the ATM withdrawals, the email change, the notary journal note, the attempted filing at the recorder's office, and the text to Kayla from a contact-named advisor. I attached the bank logs and the photo of my revocation with the day's newspaper. When I clicked submit, the screen thanked me for the report and noted that a caseworker might call within a few days. Kayla noticed the shift even if she didn't know the actions yet. She became chirpy with my grandson and overly gentle with me, which is how she behaves when she suspects someone is watching. Eric grew tense, as if he could sense a storm but not its direction. He started tidying the garage and fixing things that had been broken for months. He asked me twice if I needed anything from the pharmacy. I said no thank you and watched him move in that trying to be good son rhythm that had once soothed me and now just made me want to hand him a list of questions he should be asking his wife. The next humiliation attempted to wear a friendly face. The advisor asked to meet us at a coffee shop near the courthouse so he could explain the strategy. Eric thought it sounded efficient. Kayla said he was doing us a favor. I insisted on bringing Aisha. They tried to argue that it would be awkward. I said I felt safer with my lawyer present. When we arrived, the advisor was already at a table, a handsome 30-something in a blazer without a tie, the kind of man who calls every older woman young lady when he wants to sell them something. He stood and pumped Eric's hand, then glanced past me to Kayla with a quick exchange that told me they had already met without us. I wanted that fact on the table. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with my counsel," I said before he could launch his script. "This is Aisha from the legal clinic." He blinked, recovered, and started a monologue about probate delays and simple solutions for families. I listened without interrupting until he used the phrase, "We can slide this through." Aisha held up a palm like a traffic officer. "Nothing gets slid through," she said. "We file lawful instruments properly, or we don't file at all." She asked for his fiduciary license number. He gave a business registration instead. She asked for his supervisory attorney's name. He deflected and said he was an independent. She leaned back and took a slow breath that I recognized from our first meeting. "We're done," she said, and closed her notebook. The advisor turned to me. "Nora, can I call you Nora? You don't want to make this difficult for your family, do you?" He lowered his voice. "You're lucky to have people who care. Many folks your age don't." I looked him right in the mouth and said, People who care don't change my bank alerts to their email. People who care don't send couriers to pull my notary file while telling me we're just signing insurance forms. Eric flinched. Kayla's jaw went tight. The advisor held up his hands like an actor surrendering. I was just trying to be helpful. Good luck to you, ma'am, he said, and left with a speed that said he needed to rename a contact in his phone before someone looked. In the car, Eric finally let his confusion show. Kay, what is going on? He asked quietly, because he is polite even when he's angry. Did you change Mom's email at the bank? Kayla snapped before smoothing her tone. You were working late every night. Someone had to manage things. If Nana ended up in the hospital again, would you prefer that her bills go unpaid? Eric stared at his hands on the steering wheel, and for the first time I saw the possibility that he might turn toward me and not away. Back at home, I took my grandson to the park so the house could breathe. On the swing, he asked if I was mad at his mom. I told him I was working on making sure Nana's papers were in order. He nodded like a small adult who has been watching the people he loves talk around closed doors. Mom says adults do boring things because they love each other, he said. I pushed the swing higher and said, sometimes boring things are the brave ones. 2 days later, APS called. The caseworker's name was Ruth. She asked clear questions and did not sound like someone arriving to judge me. She explained that her role was to ensure I had control over my finances, that any caregiver arrangement was fair, and that if there were signs of undue influence, she could coordinate with law enforcement or civil attorneys. I told her I had my own counsel. She asked if she could visit the house. I said yes, but I wanted it to look like a wellness check, not a raid. We set a time for the next afternoon when Eric would be at work and Kayla would be home. Ruth arrived in a navy cardigan with a notebook and a badge she kept tucked away unless I asked to see it. We sat at the kitchen table. She asked to see my ID and a recent bank statement. Kayla hovered in the doorway, trying to decide if she should insert herself. Ruth invited her to sit. We asked the agent to explain their role if there is a power of attorney, she said, and Kayla sat with a smile that didn't reach farther than her teeth. I'm just keeping Nana from being overwhelmed, she said. She forgets things. Ruth turned to me. Do you feel you forget things that affect your money? I looked at Kayla, then back at Ruth. I forget where I put the tape sometimes, I said. I remember every penny since January. Ruth asked if we could review the power of attorney together. Kayla moved to stand and said the documents were in the basement. I said the key to the basement wasn't in my possession and that this was part of the problem. Ruth wrote that down. She asked Kayla to retrieve the file. Kayla said Eric had changed the lock for safety. Ruth wrote that down as well. Then she asked Kayla to describe how she tracked my expenses. Kayla mentioned grocery runs, pharmacy pickups, and reimbursements. She did not produce receipts. Ruth looked at me. Do you approve these purchases? I am sometimes told after the fact, I said. Ruth nodded and then asked a question I hadn't considered. Has anyone applied for caregiver compensation in your name or under a family assistance program? Kayla looked startled. Of course not, she said. We're not that kind of people. Ruth wrote something else and asked for my phone number and email so she could send me a pamphlet on revocation and resource lists. Before she left, she stood at the hallway and scanned the ceiling corner where the small camera lens sits like a dot. She didn't comment, but her eyes met mine and she gave the tiniest nod. That evening, Kayla and Eric had their first real argument in the open where I could hear it. It wasn't a shouting match. It was the heavy kind, full of pauses. You told me you were protecting her, Eric said. You didn't tell me you changed bank settings or tried to file a deed without Mom present. Kayla said she had tried to file nothing and that the courier misunderstood. Eric said the bank manager had called him after our visit to discuss elder-client procedures. Kayla asked why he was taking their side over his wife's. Eric said the only side he was trying to take was his mother's right to decide in her own house. Then I heard the muffled sound of someone sitting down hard and the door to the porch opening and closing twice. There were blows too. The next morning, the hallway camera's feed cut out and when I checked, the memory card was missing. I stood there with the empty slot in my hand and let my breath count to 20. I did not panic. I had already uploaded the important clips to a private folder Aisha set up for me. But the missing card told me Kayla had found the camera and knew I had been watching. In the afternoon, my pharmacy called to confirm the refill pickup for a medication I had not requested. When I asked which prescription, the tech said a stronger pain medication than I have ever used, called in by a telehealth provider. I told her not to fill it, and then I called Aisha. She did not like that development. That kind of thing can be used to claim you're confused or addicted, she said plainly. We'll include it in the report. The community dimension widened whether I wanted it to or not. At the grocery store, the clerk with chipped nail polish watched me count cash from the old cookbook stash. She asked if everything was okay at home. I said it was being repaired. She told me she had seen Kayla using a card in my name a few times and signing the pad without showing ID. She didn't want trouble, she said, but she thought I should know. At church, Mrs. Russo handed me a prayer card and whispered that her nephew is a patrol officer and that if I ever needed someone to stand on my porch while I collected my things, he would come as a friend. I told her I wasn't moving out. She squeezed my hand like she believed me more than she believed most people. A week into this new arrangement of truth and strategy, Lucia from the recorder's office called on her lunch break. I can't discuss filings in process, she said, and then lowered her voice enough that I knew she was giving me the shape if not the details. A document came in today with your name on it that raised supervisor flags. It has a notary acknowledgement from a store we know, but the stamp number doesn't match our current records. We paused it and will require in-person verification. I thanked her, hung up, and wrote the date and time on a yellow legal pad I had started keeping next to the phone like it was 20 years ago, because paper is a kind of anchor. That same afternoon, my grandson brought me a school folder to sign. A permission slip for a field trip, a reading log, and at the back a note from the school secretary asking if my emergency contact had changed. Mom told them we're moving soon, he said quietly. Are we moving with you? I closed the folder and told him the truth he could hold without fear. We are not moving anywhere without talking about it together, I said. He nodded solemnly like I'd given him a job he could manage. Children don't need speeches. They need sentences that match the day. The second small victory looked petty from the outside, but felt like reclaiming a room in my own house. I replaced the brass key cylinder on the basement door while Eric was at work. I had a locksmith come while Kayla was at the gym. The locksmith was a woman with strong hands who didn't ask nosy questions. She installed a double cylinder with a key that would be in my pocket and a second in a sealed envelope Aisha suggested I store in her office. When Kayla returned and saw the new lock, she didn't say anything for a full minute. Then she smiled too big and said she hoped I had a receipt so we could track expenses. I folded the receipt into my apron pocket and said, I'll track it. She looked as if she wanted to say more, and then the doorbell rang. It was the mail carrier with a certified letter. The return address was a law office I didn't recognize. Inside, there was a notice of intent to petition for temporary guardianship, citing concerns about my capacity due to documented forgetfulness and medication management issues. It listed Kayla as the petitioner and Eric as a supporter. I read it twice, and then a third time with my jaw set so tight my teeth hurt. Eric walked in the door just then and saw the envelope in my hand. He went pale. What is that? He asked. I handed it to him without speaking and watched him read his own name on a document he had never seen. He looked at Kayla with a face I had not seen since he was a boy caught in a lie and stunned by the sound of his own wrongness. Did you file this? He asked, voice flat. Kayla went on the offensive immediately. We discussed options if your mother refused to cooperate, she said. I told you we might need to protect her. You nodded. Eric shook his head slowly like he was trying to wake up. I did not consent to this, he said. And temporary guardianship is not protecting. It is taking. I called Aisha and put the phone on speaker. She listened, then said the words I needed more than any lawyerly analysis. We will respond, she said. We will request a hearing, and we will demand evidence. In this state, guardianship is a last resort. The court will look at your bank stability, your daily functioning, and the pattern of behavior by the petitioner. We have logs. We have witnesses. We prepared that night like people who plan for weather. Aisha drafted a response with a request for expedited review due to attempted transfers. She attached my revocation, the bank logs, the alert change letter, Lucia's courtesy note, Carmen's notary journal entry, and Ruth's APS case number. She asked me to write a simple affidavit in my own words describing my daily routines. I cook. I clean. I handle my pillbox without assistance. I shop with cash and receipt. I sign my name the same way every time and can describe the terms of my original will. She told me to keep my testimony plain and specific because courts read facts like carpenters read levels. They trust what is straight. That same night, another neighbor became an ally I hadn't expected. Diego, the teenage boy who mows the lawn next door, knocked to return a screwdriver he'd borrowed from Eric. He hesitated in the doorway, then said he had seen lights on in our basement at 3 a.m. 2 nights ago when he was up gaming and taking out the trash. He apologized for even noticing. I saw Mrs. Benson go out to her car twice with folders, he said. I thought it was weird at that hour. I thanked him. He offered to write the time down. I told him that would help. He wrote it on a scrap of paper with his first and last name. People think teenagers don't want to be responsible. They do if you ask them for something real. In the days between the notice and the hearing date Aisha managed to secure, Kayla tried to reset our lives into something called harmony. She brought home flowers and left a note on my door with a heart sticker. She asked if I wanted to go to the mall. She made my grandson's favorite pasta and sent a photo to the family chat of all of us at the table with the caption, "Making memories." I didn't fight the performance. I sat where I always sit. I kept my back straight. I washed the dishes and dried them in the rack, and I made sure my phone remained on the table within reach, screen up with alerts on. The night before the hearing, I packed a small tote as if I were going to an appointment rather than a fight for my own life. I put in the flash drive 2 printed copies of my affidavit, Robert's letter, and the pocket spiral notebook I had started carrying again in my purse like I was doing fieldwork for a course. I slept in my church scarf because it keeps my neck warm, not because I am superstitious. When dawn arrived, I felt steady. The courthouse smelled like paper and coffee. Aisha met me at the security line and handed me a bottle of water like we were about to watch a long recital and might need to sip through it. Eric arrived alone, face drawn, tie slightly crooked the way it always is when he dresses himself without Kayla's hands on his collar. He hugged me. He whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom." I didn't know it would go this far. I nodded and patted his back. I didn't tell him it had gone exactly as far as it was designed to go until someone threw a wrench into the design. We sat in a small courtroom with wooden benches and a sound system that made everyone sound like they were speaking inside a box. Kayla entered with a man in a suit I didn't recognize. She did not look at me. When the judge called the case, Kayla's attorney stood and launched into a speech about safety, confusion, and the need for responsible management. Aisha stood and replied with dates and documents. She didn't make speeches. She placed facts one after another until even the judge leaned forward. When it was my turn, I stood and answered simple questions about my daily routines. I listed the bills I pay and the grocery prices for milk and eggs. I recited the last 4 digits of my checking account without looking at my notes. I described the flavor of 3 different pills and the time of day I take them. This is what it means to claim capacity. You do the unglamorous inventory of a life and hand it to a stranger behind a bench who has to decide if you are still the clerk of your own house. Kayla's moment came when her attorney tried to introduce a set of photos of my bathroom cabinet and a note in my handwriting that said, "Remember to turn off kettle." They wanted the photos to prove that I was forgetful and careless with small appliances. The judge looked at me. I said, "I write notes to myself because I like precision. Writing a reminder is not incapacity. It is organization." He nodded. Then Aisha asked Kayla to produce receipts for the withdrawals she claimed were for my benefit. Kayla produced a few crumpled slips for pharmacy and gas. Aisha pressed calmly. "And the ATM cash?" Kayla said those were for incidentals. Aisha turned to me. "Mrs. Aguilar, do you use cash for incidentals?" "I have used cash for groceries," I said. $40 last week, after the bank texted that an attempted ATM withdrawal had been declined due to a limit change I requested. The judge scribbled. Aisha asked permission to play a short clip from my hallway camera. Kayla's attorney objected. The judge allowed it with a warning about privacy. The video showed Kayla at 1:47 a.m. unlocking the basement with a key and returning with a manila folder to her car. The judge asked Kayla if she had an explanation. She said she had been storing old tax documents in her trunk to take to shredding. He asked why at that hour. She said she had insomnia. He looked at Aisha. Aisha let the silence do the heavy lifting. We did not win everything in that room, but we blocked the emergency guardianship. The judge denied the petition and ordered a review in 60 days, recommending neutral third-party oversight of any household financial assistance. He also ordered that all original estate documents be placed in a sealed box accessible only by me and that any power of attorney currently claimed be suspended pending a formal capacity evaluation scheduled with a geriatrician not of the petitioner's choosing. Kayla's attorney huffed like a man who had promised his client something the law could not provide on a deadline. Eric cried quietly into his sleeve as if he needed to drain something out to make room for the new shape of this family. In the hallway afterward, the social field shifted. Lucia from the recorder's office was there with a folder I wasn't supposed to see. She didn't approach me. She approached Aisha. I came to drop off a form for another case, she said with a voice that carried just enough, and to hand you a public list of notary commission numbers that are currently valid. She let her finger rest on a line that matched the number on Kayla's submitted documents. It was off by a digit from the notary stamp Carmen uses. I didn't say anything. Carmen had written signer appeared drowsy. Now, somehow, a stamp that didn't match had signed something I had never touched. We went home under a sky the color of dishwater. I took off my coat and hung it on the hook by the door as if this were a regular Wednesday and not the day my daughter-in-law tried to become my guardian and failed. Eric disappeared into the garage. Kayla locked herself in their bedroom. I made tea and took it outside to the steps, and Mrs. Green waved from her yard as if she knew something important had shifted without knowing the details. My phone buzzed. It was Ruth from APS. We received the court's order, she said. I'm closing the emergency concern, but keeping the file open for follow-up. If anyone attempts to present new documents at the bank or recorder, they'll hit a note in the system. Keep your logs. At dusk, I went to the basement with my new key. I opened the door and turned on the light. On the workbench, next to the box where my husband kept the Christmas tree stand bolts, someone had left a folded slip of receipt paper held under a screwdriver. I picked it up. In small, neat handwriting that was not Eric's and not Kayla's, a note said, "Check the attic hatch above the hallway closet." I looked up at the bare bulb, then at the old wooden ladder against the wall. There was dust on the rungs. There was also a clean line where a hand had held recently. The house was quiet. Eric was still in the garage. Kayla was upstairs. I carried the ladder into the hall and positioned it under the hatch, my knees steady because they had to be steady and because if they weren't, I would have to call someone, and I wasn't ready to do that. I pushed the panel up and reached my hand into the dark, and my fingers brushed a manila envelope taped to a beam with blue painter's tape. I pulled it down and climbed carefully to the floor, closed the hatch, and carried the envelope into my room. Inside were 3 things: a photocopy of a deed with my name and a signature that looked like mine but wasn't, an index card with a list of dates and amounts that matched the late-night ATM withdrawals, and a business card for the advisor with an address handwritten on the back that was not his marketing office, but a mailbox rental on the other side of town. There was no note, no name of the person who left it. I turned the index card over. On the back, a single line in pencil: "I clean on Tuesdays." I stood at the window and looked at the curb where once a week a woman in gray overalls parked a small car and brought her vacuum up our walk. She never spoke more than hello. She never stayed long enough to gossip. I had barely learned her name because Kayla paid her in cash and scheduled the visits. She had been in the basement and the hallway and under the attic hatch. She had seen more than any of us realized. I put the envelope under my sweater against my skin so that if anyone knocked on my door or called me downstairs, I would not have to decide whether to leave it on the bed. Then I sat on the edge and called Aisha. I told her what I had found. She made a sound that was not surprise, not relief, something like confirmation clicking into place. "Do not confront anyone tonight," she said. "Bring it to me in the morning. We will verify the notary number, the mailbox, and the dates against the bank log." She paused. "This is the missing piece, Nora. We need the person who can testify about where it was and who put it there." I ended the call and placed the envelope between my mattress and box spring as if I were a child hiding a dollar. I locked my door, which I never do, and lay back down fully dressed. The house settled around me with the small creaks of wood aging in its place. In the quiet, a new sound joined the old ones, the soft scrape of someone testing my doorknob and the pause of a person deciding whether to knock. The weeks leading up to Victoria's big dinner were suffocating. Every day she rehearsed the guest list, spoke of the dishes she would serve, and reminded me of my role as though I were hired help. She paraded through the house in new dresses, bought with money I suspected came from the very accounts Robert had left for me, yet which I could no longer freely access. Kevin checked papers in his study each night, sometimes leaving doors ajar, confident I would not dare intrude. But I was no longer the obedient shadow they believed me to be. Robert's letter burned in my pocket every day, a quiet promise of justice. I waited, gathered fragments of truth, and prepared for the moment they could no longer deny what they had done. The dinner was announced as a celebration of Kevin's promotion, but the truth was clear. It was a performance to cement Victoria's status as the rightful mistress of the house. She invited distant relatives, business partners, and even neighbors who had whispered about me in the street. Their presence was not accidental. She wanted witnesses when she declared herself the owner, and she wanted me to shrink silently in the corner. What she did not know was that I had spoken quietly with Mr. Fitzgerald, Robert's lawyer, and with the bank officer who confirmed that forged documents had been submitted. Both men were discreet, both cautious, but they respected Robert and had no intention of allowing fraud to stand unchallenged. They promised to come to the dinner when I explained what would unfold. The day of the dinner I rose before dawn. My hands trembled not with fear but with the weight of what I carried. Robert's copy of the will was safely sealed in my handbag, along with the letter in his handwriting. The bank envelope Mrs. Green had slipped to me lay beside it, its contents enough to reveal Victoria and Kevin's scheme. I spent the morning in silence, avoiding Victoria's orders to polish the silver or set the table. She barked at me, her voice sharp from nerves, but I let her words slide past. My mind was on the evening. By 6 o'clock the house was bright with lights, the smell of roasted meat and expensive wine filling the air. Guests arrived in polished cars, stepping through the door with curious glances. I caught whispers, how well Victoria and Kevin had landed on their feet after Robert's death, how generous they were to keep me around. The humiliation pricked at me, but I held my head high. I had endured months of silence for this very night. Victoria clinked her glass at the head of the table once everyone was seated. "Thank you all for joining us to celebrate Kevin's promotion and our new chapter here at Oakwood Drive," she began, her smile wide, her posture regal. Kevin placed a hand on hers as though to emphasize their unity. "This home represents stability, legacy, and the future of our family," he added smoothly. "And Victoria has shown remarkable strength in stepping into her father's shoes, ensuring everything continues as he intended." I felt the room tilt slightly. Guests nodded, glasses lifted, and neighbors offered warm smiles. Only Mr. Fitzgerald's eyes sought mine across the table, calm but intent. Victoria raised her glass higher. "Tonight is also about gratitude. My father left me not just this home, but the responsibility of caring for what he built. Kevin and I are proud to continue his legacy." She paused deliberately, then glanced toward me. "And my mother has been gracious enough to let us make this transition smoothly. Soon she'll be moving into a more comfortable place, better suited for her needs." The words fell like stones. Guests turned their eyes to me. Some showed pity, others concealed judgment. My chest tightened, but I stood slowly, placing both hands on the back of my chair. "Forgive me," I said, my voice steady though my pulse hammered. "But there seems to be a misunderstanding. Robert did indeed leave a legacy. And he made his wishes very clear." Victoria laughed lightly, a brittle sound. Mom, please, let's not do this in front of everyone. We've already explained the paperwork. You don't need to worry yourself. Kevin leaned back, smirking faintly. It's all been handled, Margaret. Best not to complicate things. I reached into my handbag and withdrew the sealed envelope. The room grew silent as I placed it on the table. This is Robert's will. His true will. Witnessed, notarized, and copied in his own hand. And this, I lifted the second paper, is his letter to me, written in case something exactly like this should occur. A ripple of murmur swept the table. Victoria's smile faltered, her hand tightening on her glass until it trembled. Where did you get that? She demanded, her voice too sharp to hide her panic. From Robert himself, I replied quietly. He prepared for everything. He trusted me to protect his wishes, even from his own daughter. Mr. Fitzgerald rose then, his distinguished presence commanding the room. I can confirm this, ladies and gentlemen. I was Robert's lawyer for over 30 years. I gave Victoria a copy of the will, but the one she presented to the court was altered. Tonight I see for myself that Margaret has the true document. Gasps erupted. Several relatives leaned forward, eyes wide. Neighbors exchanged glances, whispers flying faster now. Kevin stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. This is absurd. She's confused. She doesn't understand what she's holding. But before he could continue, the bank officer I had spoken with stepped into the dining room, escorted by Mrs. Green. He carried a folder, his expression firm. On the contrary, Mr. Bennett, he said evenly. I've reviewed the account records. Documents with Mrs. Sullivan's forged signature were submitted by your wife. This is criminal fraud, and it will not stand. The room froze. Victoria's face drained of color, her eyes darting between Kevin and me, as if searching for an escape route. Kevin tried to speak, but the officer held up a hand. I have copies here. Witnesses present tonight will see for themselves. I stepped closer to my daughter then, my voice low but strong. You told me I was useless. You told me to find somewhere else to die. But Robert left me this home, these accounts, and my dignity. And tonight, before all of these witnesses, the truth is clear. The silence that followed was heavy. Guests looked at Victoria, at Kevin, then at me. For the first time in months, I did not feel invisible. I felt seen. Victoria tried to gather herself, lifting her chin, but her voice cracked when she spoke. You can't do this to me, Mom. You don't understand. I was protecting you. No, I interrupted firmly. You were protecting yourself. And in doing so, you tried to erase me. The lawyer spread the papers across the table for all to see. Gasps rose again as Robert's clear instructions were read aloud. The house to me, 70% of the assets to me, the remainder to be managed for Victoria under conditions she could not alter. Kevin's face darkened, his confidence collapsing as quickly as the lies they had built. I looked around the table, meeting the eyes of each relative, each neighbor, each guest who had believed Victoria's story. Some avoided my gaze, others nodded slightly, acknowledging the truth. And then, just as the room seemed to settle into stunned silence, a new voice broke through. It was my grandson, standing at the far end of the table where he had been forgotten all evening. His voice was small but clear. Grandma's telling the truth. I saw Mommy with those papers. She said no one would believe you. Every head turned toward him. Victoria's lips parted, her face a mask of horror. Kevin reached for the boy, but the child stepped back, his eyes brimming with tears. The room erupted not in noise, but in an even deeper silence than before. Eric closed my door softly and stood with his back against it like a man who needed a surface to hold him up, and for a long half-minute he could not shape words. His hand shook when he held out the small plastic card. I shouldn't have taken it, he said, but she hid it in the garage inside a bag of winter gloves, and I knew that wasn't right. I told him to sit, and he dropped onto the chair by my dresser, eyes fixed on the floorboards. I slid the card into the laptop Aisha had helped me set up with a simple viewer, and I opened the last recorded clip. The camera's angle faced the hallway and the top of the basement stairs, and there was Kayla in a gray hoodie at 2 a.m, whispering into her phone that she had the deed ready to go when the number is sorted. then lifting a folded document into the frame and pressing the paper onto a stamp. The stamp had a number on it that didn't match the one Carmen keeps, and even on the grainy video you could see Kayla hesitate, check her phone again, and then press harder like force could make it true. In the next clip, she slid an envelope under her jacket and crept down the stairs toward the basement door, pausing to listen by my room as if I were a smoke detector she wanted to disable. Eric watched in silence, then scrubbed a hand over his face and said the one thing I had been waiting to hear for months. "Mom, I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. There is a difference between anger that tears and anger that builds a straight line, and I chose the straight line. I told Eric we would take the car to Aisha at 8 when her office opened. I told him not to confront Kayla tonight because she had already removed evidence once, and I was not going to give her time to do it again." He nodded and asked if I wanted him to sleep on the couch. I told him to sleep in his own bed because this house was not a stage where she could decide who stood where, and because tomorrow I would need him presentable and steady. He stood to leave, then turned back and asked in a low voice if I hated him. I told him that I loved him and that I was angry at what he had allowed, and that love and anger were not mutually exclusive. He exhaled like a man who had expected a sentence and had instead received an instruction. In the morning we were at the clinic when Aisha unlocked the door. She took one look at our faces and waved us straight into the conference room. We showed her the clips under the overhead light, and she watched without commentary until the final frame, then paused the video and zoomed the timestamp and the stamp pad edge and the outline of the seal on the paper in Kayla's hand. "This is enough to trigger a formal complaint with the Notary Commission and to backstop the recorder's pause," she said. "It also bolsters the APS case and the denial of guardianship." She drafted a short affidavit for Eric to sign stating how and where he found the card, that he had not edited the file, and that he recognized the person in the video as his wife. His hand shook only once at his signature. When he looked up, his eyes were red, and he asked Aisha what would happen to his son if this turned into charges. Aisha spoke clearly and with that professional kindness she uses when there is no perfect outcome, only lawful ones. "Children need stable adults," she said. "Your son has at least 2. Focus on giving him the truth and a routine." Aisha called Ruth at APS while we were still there and summarized the new evidence with times and dates. Ruth said she would coordinate with a detective who handled forgery cases and check with the Notary Commission investigator about the mismatched seal number Lucia had flagged. We left with copies of our statements, a checklist for the day, and a plan that ended with a public setting because privacy had been used as a tool against me, and I wanted the reversal to be witnessed. The setting presented itself faster than expected. The Homeowners Association had its spring budget meeting that evening in the church hall, and our block always brought a crowd when property taxes were on the agenda. I had stepped in as treasurer after Mr. Buxton moved, and my name was on the flyer. People would show up because they wanted to argue about landscaping assessments. I would show up with numbers, and when the agenda came to new business, I would ask for 3 minutes to address a matter of household documents that had become a neighborhood safety issue. It was not drama, it was bookkeeping at scale. We spent the afternoon moving methodically. First, the recorder's office. Lucia took the memory card from Aisha's hand with a chain of custody form and placed it directly into an evidence envelope. She asked us to wait in the lobby while she showed the supervisor. When she returned, she had a printout with a large gray stamp across the top that read, "Hold pending verification." She explained that any deed or instrument associated with my parcel would be routed to a supervisor's desk until I appeared in person with identification. She added quietly that the image of the stamp on Kayla's paper did not match the year format of the notary number in use by the store where Kayla claimed to have signed me. "I can't give legal conclusions," she said, "but the patterns are in motion." Next, the bank. Mr. Lopez escorted us into his office and introduced us to a loss prevention officer with a notebook already open. I laid out the ATM withdrawal dates with the index card the cleaner had left in the attic envelope. Eric provided the portion of the video where Kayla typed on her phone about limits and where she walked out to her car with folders. The officer asked questions like a carpenter measuring cut lengths. He wanted times and amounts, and who had possession of which card and which alert went where. When we finished, he looked at Eric and asked how soon he could remove Kayla's access from any joint accounts and whether he needed legal advice for that. Eric said he would handle it by the end of the day. The officer nodded without judgment and asked me if I wanted to place a fraud alert on my name with the credit bureaus. I said yes, and he made the call from his desk while we sat there and listened to him verify my identity and request the note. He printed me copies, and I placed them in the folder that I now carried like a traveling office. Then we went home to make dinner, because children do not pause hungry just because adults are filing complaints. I kept my hands steady with onions and garlic and a pan on low. Kayla moved around the kitchen as if nothing had shifted and asked my grandson about his spelling test. When he ran outside with the dog, she turned to Eric and asked if the HA meeting would take long because she had a friend from yoga who might stop by. Eric told her evenly that we would all be at the meeting because I needed support for a treasurer's report that involved our property file. She frowned, then smiled, and asked if that meant she should dress nicely for the church hall. Eric did not answer. I set the table, and we ate in an arrangement that looked like a family and felt like people rehearsing different plays. At the church hall, the folding chairs were set in rows, and the coffee table had a plate of store cookies that always crumble too fast. Neighbors filed in with papers and opinions. Mrs. Green waved and patted the chair next to her. Diego slouched near the back with headphones around his neck and raised a hand when he saw me, which made my throat feel tight in a good way because he could have chosen to be invisible. I distributed the budget sheets and took my seat at the front with the other officers. The meeting started with ordinary business, dues and pruning schedules, and a complaint about a fence. When we reached new business, I raised my hand, stood, and asked for 3 minutes. Our chair, retired teacher who respects clocks more than personalities, nodded and set her phone timer. I did not give a speech. I listed facts. I said that I had filed reports with proper authorities regarding attempted misuse of owner documents in our house and that the recorder's office had placed a hold on my parcel to prevent unauthorized recording. I said this mattered to neighbors because couriers and notaries had been drawn to our block under false pretenses, and that if anyone saw late-night activity at their own doors regarding deeds or signatures, they should ask for identification and verification without apology. I did not say Kayla's name. I did not point. I kept to numbers and offices and dates. When I finished, the chair asked if any neighbor had a question. Mrs. Russo raised her hand and said she had seen a car idle outside our house after midnight twice in the past month and had written the plate down, and did I want it? I said yes, and the retired teacher allowed it because it was on topic. Diego stood and cleared his throat and said he had seen someone enter our basement late at night and had already given the date and time to my attorney if anyone official needed it. The room held quiet like a careful thing because everyone understood this was a small neighborhood, and this was one of those moments when you decide whether to look away or to help someone draw a line. Kayla sat in the second row between Eric and my grandson, and she remained very still. After the meeting, people lined up to bring me names of contractors, a notary they trust, a cousin who works in the clerk's office, small offerings that together felt like community instead of gossip. The detective Ruth had mentioned arrived at the end in plain clothes and asked if we could step into the office by the coat rack. He said his name, showed his badge, and asked if he could see the video clip and the attic envelope contents. Aisha arrived 2 minutes later with a portable drive and the printed chain of custody form Lucia had prepared. We watched the video on the office computer, and the detective asked slow questions that made you explain without defending. He took the business card with the mailbox address and wrote a note to check surveillance at the rental store. He said he would interview the cleaner who left the note about Tuesdays because a witness who can explain how she found the envelope would tie the attic to a pattern. He did not promise arrests, and I did not ask for them. He promised to follow the paper and the ink and the money. That was enough. Consequences did not arrive in a single dramatic hour. They came in increments that added up to a wall. The Notary Commission suspended the recognition of the stamp number that appeared on Kayla's papers pending an inquiry, and Carmen's journal entry that I had been drowsy. The day after surgery became a training example for their staff about pausing when someone seems medicated. The bank reversed a series of late-night withdrawals after determining that they were made with my card by someone who was not the cardholder and that they had been facilitated by a settings change I had not authorized. The recorder's office rejected the attempted transfer on death deed with a letter that used the phrase, defective acknowledgement, and sent copies to the address on file for me, not the one someone else had tried to substitute. The APS case did not close entirely. It shifted from emergency to monitoring with periodic check-ins, which I appreciated because accountability is not a punishment when it protects your name. Inside the house, the ground changed even if the wallpaper did not. Eric stopped handing over his phone when Kayla asked for it to check something, and he began attending the school meetings himself rather than letting a text message stand in for an adult presence. He moved out of their bedroom and into the den for a while, not to punish, but to think without someone restyling his thoughts. He asked me if separating from Kayla would hurt our grandson more than staying married to a person who had used the word guardianship like a solution. And I told him that children read rooms better than adults and that a calm room with 2 households is better than a room where adults whisper and hide envelopes. He started individual counseling through his employer and asked his therapist how to grow a spine without growing cruelty. He told me that with a small smile I had not seen since he was 25, and I told him that this sentence made me proud. Kayla tried 2 strategies in quick succession. First, she was indignant, accusing me of turning the neighborhood against her and of using my age as a shield to avoid criticism. When that failed to land in a house where a camera and a memory card had already turned, she switched to tearful. She said she had been scared after my surgery and had overmanaged because she had no family who taught her how to care for elders and that I should have guided her more gently if she went too far. I told her that guidance requires honesty and that you cannot teach someone who hides a key. She asked if she could stay in the house while she and Eric figured things out. I said she could stay until the end of the school term because children should not be moved mid-year, and after that the adults would make a plan that would not include her controlling my basement or my bank. She looked at me as if she were trying to decide if I would waver. I did not. Public judgment came not just from judges, but from small rooms. At the next school PTO meeting, one mother who had seen me counting tickets at the raffle table for years put her hand over mine and said she was sorry for not checking in sooner. At the grocery store, the clerk with the chipped polish smiled without pity and told me I looked well-rested. At church, the usher who always saved me a bulletin asked if I would speak at the seniors group about how to set up alerts and revocations because his sister was afraid to talk to her son about money and needed a script. I said yes, and Aisha helped me prepare a handout with simple steps and phone numbers. We called it Your Name, Your Numbers, and it fit on one page. I handed it out to 20 people in the parish hall on a Wednesday afternoon, and when it was over, 3 women stayed behind to ask if writing I revoke in their own handwriting was enough to start. I told them it was a good first step and wrote Aisha's clinic hours on the back. The advisor who had liked to call himself helpful learned that words have shadows. The detective traced his mailbox rental and pulled security footage that showed him meeting Kayla's courier in the parking lot after a visit to the recorder's building. The licensing board investigated his marketing practices and found enough to suspend his ability to represent himself as any kind of fiduciary. He did not go to jail. He went quiet, which in some ways was better for everyone because even quiet men read their own files and recalibrate their pitches. I found his business card in my drawer months later and placed it in a small envelope marked Lessons. The cleaner, whose name is Marta, agreed to testify if it came to that. She explained in simple words that she had found the envelope while dusting the hallway and had recognized my name next to lines that did not look like my careful slant. She had not known what to do at first, because she does not like to be in the middle of other people's families, but she also does not like to see older women pushed. She had left the note about Tuesdays because she believed that was the safest way to alert me without Kayla noticing, and she had avoided taking money from Kayla for 2 weeks until she could see me open the envelope and understood I had help. I gave her a raise and told her that if she ever needed a reference for a client who respected her boundaries, I would write a letter that would get her a job in any house on our street. Eric asked to be added to the HA Finance Committee because he wanted to learn how to sit in a chair and listen to numbers without his mind wandering to someone else's plan. He started taking our grandson to golf on Saturday with no excuses and left his phone in the car. He met with a family mediator with Kayla present and told her without anger that they needed to build a custody routine that did not rely on my availability and did not place their son in the role of messenger between adults. The mediator nodded and kept notes and asked practical questions about drop-off times and school concerts and doctor visits, because practical questions are the rope you hand people when you want them to move across a complicated creek without falling in. I kept the house. I had the roof inspected, the gutters cleaned, and the basement inventoried with a new labeler that printed in my handwriting font because I like the visual consistency. I put Robert's letter in a small frame in my desk drawer where I could see it when I reached for paper clips, not because I needed drama, but because I wanted to thank the man who had understood me well enough to leave a plan that respected my mind. I rebuilt my personal email and password manager with the clinic's help and wrote the master password in 2 sealed envelopes. One went to Aisha's office, one to a safe deposit box. I joined a community college evening course to help small nonprofits with bookkeeping because the parish secretary asked if I could teach her to reconcile donations without crying, and the syllabus looked like something that could fill my Tuesday evenings with useful talk. Kayla moved out in June to an apartment across town. She told my grandson that everything would be fine because adults sometimes live in different places and love is not measured by square footage. I told him that both his homes were still his and that nothing he did was at fault. He nodded and asked if golf camp was still on. It was, and I put the envelope of cash I had saved for it into Eric's hand in the parking lot on sign-up day without turning it into a statement about anything other than a boy and a fairway. Kayla did not attend the final court review of the guardianship petition she had filed, and the judge dismissed it with a sentence that noted the petitioner had failed to show cause and that the respondent had demonstrated consistent management of daily affairs. The order also noted that any future petitions must include new evidence and may be subject to sanctions if filed in bad faith. I put a copy of that sentence in the folder with the word "finished" written at the top. There were small penalties that mattered to me more than the formal ones. Kayla went to the UPS store one afternoon and saw Carmen behind the counter helping a woman notarize a school form, and Carmen kept her tone professional but did not smile. At the recorder's office, a clerk Kayla had charmed on her first visit asked for identification with the exactness of a person who has learned something and is applying it uniformly. At the bank, the teller with the lightning bolt tie asked Kayla if she would like to sit while waiting for Eric to arrive, because he could not discuss account matters with her without him. These are tiny scenes that do not belong in a film, but they're the world correcting itself by inches. I watch them without gloating because gloating wastes time and I am busy. I found a rhythm again. On Mondays I did the HA deposits and sent the spreadsheet to the chair. On Tuesdays, Marta cleaned and brought me small stories about other houses that did not include gossip, only notes on which light bulbs were easiest to change. On Wednesdays, I taught a class at the parish hall on how to read a bank statement. On Thursdays, I made a pot of soup and put half in the freezer for a day when energy would run short. On Fridays, I walked with Mrs. Green around the block and we named trees. On Saturdays, I took my grandson to the driving range if Eric had work, and on Sundays I sat in my own pew and thanked the quiet of the sanctuary for letting me breathe, without someone else's schedule pressing a list into my hand. You asked me for a lesson, but I will not lecture. What I can give you are the actions that held when everything else tilted. I wrote things down. I made copies. I asked for help from people whose jobs involve saying no to bad plans. I kept my voice even when humiliation pushed at my throat because evenness travels farther than volume in rooms with rules. I accepted that being a burden on paper for an hour can protect you from being erased for a decade, and I did it with my eyes open and my jaw unclenched. I learned that allies often have keys you do not know they carry. A neighbor with a casserole and a plate number, a clerk who notices an email change, a cleaner who understands where people hide their intentions. A son who wakes up with something like shame and chooses to sit in it long enough to let it wash off honestly. I did not get back the months Kayla spent rearranging my kitchen and my accounts. I did not get back the sleep I lost listening for footsteps in the hall. I did not get back the old version of my son who never had to look at his wife and say the word taking like a fact. What I got instead was a house that answers to my key, a bank that texts me and only me, a community that looks up when a woman my age says she needs 3 minutes, and a grandson who watched adults fix something broken and learned that this is what grown-ups are supposed to do. I keep Robert's photograph in the kitchen drawer with the scissors, and sometimes I touch it when I pass, not to weep but to acknowledge that planning is love in long form. On a warm evening in late summer, after the HOA meeting went short because the numbers lined up and people were satisfied, I sat on the front steps with a cup of tea and listened to the street. Mrs. Russo watered her plants. Diego rode his bike in slow circles, practicing no hands. Eric came by with my grandson after golf and left a bucket of balls by the garage as if returning library books. Kayla drove past without stopping, and I did not flinch. I had set my boundaries and filed my papers and cooked my dinner and taught my class and signed my name in the book that matters, the one where you write down the days you remained yourself when someone tried to write something else on top. I tell you this as a friend, not as a performer. If someone in your orbit starts moving your labels and your passwords and your voice, notice it early. If you do not, notice it later. Ask for printouts. Put dates on things. Learn the names of the clerks who process the forms that hold your life steady. Let your fear sit down while your pencil writes. Do not underestimate how far a small community can carry you when you stand up and tell the truth in a room with folding chairs and store cookies. And if you have a son like mine who needed a memory card and a courtroom to find his footing, leave a chair at your table for him when he returns, not because forgetting is a virtue, but because healing takes a seat just like paperwork does. You are not a guest in your own kitchen. You are the person who knows where everything goes.